nestled in a tranquil lakeside community where time seemed to slow down and nature still held sway. My family's lakefront property was more than just a home, it was a legacy, surrounded by tall pines and echoing with the sounds of birdsong and gentle waves. This land had been in my family for generations. It wasn't just real estate, it was sacred ground filled with irreplaceable memories. Summer BBQs by the fire pit, sunrise fishing trips with Grandpa, and quiet evenings listening to the lake breathe. But tranquility has a way of attracting trouble. That trouble arrived in the form of a newly appointed HOA president, infamously dubbed Karen by our neighborhood. The kind of person who thrives on control. Karen wasn't content to oversee community maintenance or enforce reasonable rules. No, she had a thirst for domination and a deep personal resentment toward anyone who didn't bow to her imagined authority, especially me. A peaceful life upended by HOA power games for years. Things ran smoothly despite the HOA's presence. Most neighbors got along. Everyone respected personal space. My dock, my yard, and my slice of lakefront paradise had always been seen as my rightful domain. But when Karen took charge, that calm was shattered. She began reinterpreting vague clauses in the HOA's outdated bylaws, particularly those dealing with shared access and common easements. Out of nowhere, I received word that a portion of my private lakefront was being reassigned to allow public access through my yard. Except it wasn't for the public at all, it was a shady favor to her cousin. Without warning, her smug out-of-town cousin showed up claiming his right to use my dock, stroll my lawn, and anchor his jet ski. The audacity was jaw-dropping. Legal loopholes, HOA intimidation, and a petty act of genius. Every attempt I made to get clear answers from the HOA board was met with deflection, manipulation, or outright silence. Karen threw around legal jargon, threatened fines, and even implied that resisting her would lead to property violations or community backlash. But I wasn't about to be bullied off my own land. Rather than fight her in a months-long legal war, I decided to make a bold, public statement. I reviewed the property line survey, pulled city permits, and hired contractors to build a massive, high-grade privacy fence stretching precisely along my land's boundary and cutting off access to the area she tried to steal. Fence of fury. A community divided and Karen humiliated the day the fence went up. The entire neighborhood noticed. Some neighbors were outraged. Others applauded my move. Social media lit up with photos. Karen, she stormed over with her cousin and screamed, "You fenced the lake." But I had the permits. I had the proof. And now, I had my peace back. This wasn't just about fencing off land. It was about standing up against HOA overreach, property rights abuse, and corruption disguised as community service. 2. The rise of a neighborhood. Tyrant Karen takes control. Things changed the day Karen assumed the role of HOA president. Elected with little fanfare and even less oversight, she wasted no time cementing her authority. From the moment she took charge, it was clear this wasn't going to be a quiet, cooperative leadership. Karen operated more like a petty dictator in suburbia than a community leader. She immediately began rewriting policies, introducing excessive regulations, and reviving obscure clauses from outdated HOA handbooks. And every change seemed designed to benefit her inner circle or punish those she personally disliked. Her favorite weapon? Bureaucracy. If she didn't like you, she'd drown you in forms, inspections, and HOA violation warnings. Though she never said it outright, Karen's attitude toward me was particularly hostile. Whether it was resentment over my family's long-standing presence in the neighborhood, envy of our peaceful lakeside property, or just her innate thirst for control, it became obvious. She had a target hand. It was me. 3. The shady scheme. A lakefront reallocation. The situation took a bizarre and sinister turn when Karen claimed to be redefining property usage around the community lake. Hiding behind an obscure section of the HOA charter, she cited a clause that mentioned shared recreational access for community members, something no previous HOA board had ever enforced. With no community meeting, no formal vote, and certainly no homeowner consent, Karen declared that the private lakefront portion of my land was to be considered communal access. That alone was outrageous, but it didn't stop there. A few days later, an unfamiliar man arrived and began walking across my property like he owned it. He lounged near the dock, parked a folding chair on my lawn, and even began measuring space near the waterline. When I confronted him, he casually told me, "Karen said I could use this, it's my family's now." Turns out, the man was Karen's cousin, and she had secretly granted him access or worse, unofficial rights to my private lakefront property. For confusion, intimidation, and legal intimidation tactics stunned by the blatant land grab, I sought immediate clarification. I sent letters, requested documentation, and even asked for an emergency HOA meeting to discuss the matter. Every effort was stonewalled. Karen claimed she had board approval and referenced phantom historic agreements no one could produce. It was clear she was making up rules as she went backed only by her authority and a web of silence. When I tried to involve the county zoning office and property surveyors, I was met with delays, disinterest, and unclear jurisdiction. I began to suspect Karen had connections or was leveraging her influence to stall any accountability. Then came the threats. Official-looking letters began arriving, warning me of possible fines, property violations, and HOA legal actions if I interfered with authorized lake access. It was nothing short of coordinated HOA harassment, campaign of intimidation dressed in legal jargon. But what Karen didn't know is I wasn't backing down. Not this time. Point 5. When enough was enough, the fence that changed everything after weeks of stalling, HOA threats, and watching a stranger treat his cherished lakefront like a public park. The narrator realized something critical: reasoning with power-hungry people never works. He knew if he allowed this to continue, not only would his property rights be trampled, but his silence would set a dangerous precedent for the entire neighborhood. Court was an option, but legal battles are expensive, slow, and uncertain. Especially when facing a local HOA president who seemed to have influence in all the wrong places. Instead of dragging things out, he went another route. He played it smart, the kind of smart that leaves no room for counters. First, he hired a licensed surveyor to verify the exact coordinates of his property line down to the inch. Next, he filed for all the necessary permits through the city, ensuring that whatever he built would be bulletproof against HOA retaliation. Then came the call to a local contractor, one with a reputation for building serious privacy fences. Within days, the construction began, and it wasn't just a fence, it was a message, towering in height, reinforced with steel posts, and stretching the full length of the lakefront boundary. The fence was a bold architectural middle finger to everything Karen and her cousin had tried to pull. It was sleek, modern, and unmistakably final. On the side facing the HOA, he even installed decorative panels with iron-welded lettering that read, "Private property, no trespassing, access denied." It didn't just block Karen's cousin from the lake, it shut the door on the entire farce she had tried to orchestrate. For the first time in weeks, the narrator stood on his dock and looked at the water without seeing an uninvited guest or hearing about community access. His land, once again, felt like home. 6. The fence heard round the neighborhood. Word spread faster than wildfire. At first, it was whispers and double takes from neighbors out on their evening walks. Then came the smartphones. People stopped to take pictures. Some asked questions. Others simply gave a knowing nod. Within 48 hours, the fence was trending on local Facebook groups and neighborhood forums. Some residents were outraged, accusing the narrator of being divisive or unneighborly. But a surprising number of voices rose in support, people who had been quietly bullied by the HOA for years, now cheering for the one person who had finally stood up. The fence became a symbol not just of property boundaries, but of personal boundaries, a stand against overreach, a declaration of self-respect. In a world where HOAs too often go unchecked, people called it petty revenge. Others called it poetic justice. But everyone agreed on one thing: nobody had ever stood up to Karen like this before, and she was not handling it well. It didn't take long for word of the towering, no-nonsense fence to reach the queen of neighborhood Karen, the infamous HOA president who had orchestrated the whole lakefront debacle. And when she saw the full scope of the structure that now cut off her cousin's illegal access to the lake, she completely unraveled, armed with her clipboard, a megaphone of entitlement in her voice, and a small crew of HOA diehards trailing behind her like loyal minions. Karen stormed down the path toward the newly fortified property line. Her cousin, red-faced and visibly embarrassed, shuffled awkwardly behind her, unsure of what to say or do. Karen didn't bother with diplomacy. She wasn't here to negotiate. She pointed dramatically at the fence and yelled, her voice rising with every word, "You fenced the lake. This is community property. You can't do this." But here's the thing: she absolutely couldn't stop it. The narrator, calm as ever, walked to the edge of his property, still within legal bounds, and looked Karen dead in the eye. He didn't need to raise his voice or argue. Instead, he pulled out a neatly prepared folder. Inside were certified copies of the property survey, legal boundary documentation, city-issued permits, and inspection approvals. Everything was in order. Every inch of that fence was 100% legal, reinforced, and government-approved. Karen's face went from red to purple. Her anger couldn't find a foothold. There was no loophole, no technicality, no vague regulation she could twist to her benefit this time. Her cousin stood silently behind her, avoiding eye contact with anyone, clearly realizing he had been part of a scheme that had just publicly imploded. One of the HOA board members, who'd come with them, tried to chime in with legal threats, but quickly quieted when the narrator explained, with clarity and confidence, that any attempt to touch or alter the fence would be considered trespassing and criminal damage to private property. He even pointed to the motion-activated security cameras, now installed on his side of the fence, recording everything in high definition. The fence wasn't just physical, it was smart, secure, and documented. Karen was left speechless, fuming behind her oversized sunglasses, caught in the spotlight of a situation she had no power to reverse. The day her control died, what Karen failed to realize was that in trying to overextend her authority, she had crossed the wrong homeowner. The narrator wasn't just some pushover with a pretty yard. He was someone who valued his family's legacy, understood his legal rights, and wasn't afraid to fight back with brains instead of brute force. And now, with the fence standing, strong and her reputation in tatters, Karen had no choice but to retreat, publicly humiliated and legally outmaneuvered. The balance of power in the neighborhood had officially shifted, and the whole community felt it. Point 8. The cousin's walk of shame. A silent retreat. Karen's cousin had strutted onto that lakefront as if he were royalty. Empowered by his cousin's corrupt HOA clout and dripping with smug entitlement, he believed the land was his to claim, relax on, and dominate despite having no legal ownership, no stake, and certainly no right to it. But what he didn't anticipate was that the homeowner wasn't going to roll over. This wasn't just a property defense, it was a calculated stand against arrogance and abuse of power. When the fence finally went up, towering, professionally installed and legally unassailable, sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. It wasn't just a physical wall. It was a verdict that echoed loud and clear. You crossed a line. Now it's closed forever. A few days after Karen's public meltdown, her cousin returned, but this time there was no smugness, no entitlement, no backup. Just a man with deflated pride, standing in front of a fence that might as well have been a monument to his failure. Alone, he hovered near the perimeter, occasionally leaning forward to glance through the slats, as if expecting the gate to magically open, but it didn't, because it never would. There were no shouting matches this time, just the quiet weight of humiliation. He didn't speak, he didn't knock. He simply stood there, the same way someone lingers at a door that's been permanently closed to them. It was a reversal of roles. The man who once trespassed with confidence was now a powerless bystander, a public witness to his own downfall. The very land he tried to hijack had rejected him, and the community had seen it all. In the end, what was supposed to be a smart political favor and a selfish power move turned into a highly public embarrassment. Karen's cousin never returned to the lakefront again, not even to say goodbye. 9. A fence that sparked a revolution, but the story didn't end when the cousin walked away in defeat. If anything, it was just the beginning. What started as a private homeowner protecting his legal rights quickly evolved into a neighborhood awakening. That fence, at first seen as a passive-aggressive structure, soon became the symbol of something much bigger: resistance, reform, and rebellion against unchecked HOA authority. Homeowners who had once felt isolated began to speak up. What were once whispered frustrations during backyard BBQs turned into open challenges at board meetings. Stories surfaced about fines over grass length, citations over mailbox colors, and bullying disguised as community enforcement. The fence had given them something they didn't know they needed: permission to fight back. Within a matter of days, a digital petition calling for Karen's immediate removal as HOA president began circulating. People signed in droves. Longtime residents who'd been silently enduring her reign of HOA terror finally had enough. Newer homeowners who feared retaliation now felt protected by the momentum of community unity. And just like that, the political fortress Karen had built over the years began to crumble piece by piece. The fence became more than a boundary. It was a Bakuna bold message that said, you may write the rules, but you don't get to rewrite what's right. It had redrawn the neighborhood, not just physically, but emotionally, culturally, and morally. A new standard had been set, and all of it began with one man standing firm and simply saying, not on my land, not anymore. 10. The calm after the storm. Peace restored. Legacy protected in the end. The fight wasn't just about boundaries on a map, it was about protecting legacy, reclaiming dignity, and restoring peace. The narrator didn't just win a property dispute. He didn't just stop a power-hungry HOA president or block an entitled cousin from stealing what was never theirs. No, he reclaimed something far more valuable: his quiet, unshakable peace of mind. Now, when the sun sets across the lake and golden light dances across the water's surface, he sits with his family on the back porch, a warm cup of coffee in hand, and a calm heart in his chest. The once vulnerable shoreline is now shielded behind a tall, elegant, and fully legal fence. A barrier, yes, but also a reminder of resilience. From where he sits, the lake is more than just a scenic view, it's a symbol. A place once tainted by intrusion and stress, now returned to the sanctuary it had always been. Birds chirp, water laps gently against the rocks. The only thing that breaks the silence is laughter from inside the home, a sound that had been missing during the months of conflict. There's no sign of Karen anymore. No HOA letters stuffed in the mailbox. No threats of fines. No barking orders at community meetings. She resigned quietly under pressure, her grip on the neighborhood broken by her own greed and arrogance. Her cousin disappeared without a trace, just a faded memory of a failed land grab and a man who tried to steal comfort but walked away with shame instead. And the fence, still standing, strong, defiant, permanent, a monument not to revenge, but to justice. A structure that said, you may push, but I will not fall. The neighbors now wave a little longer when they pass by. They nod with quiet admiration. A few even stop to say thanks. not just for the fence but for having the courage to do what no one else had dared to do. He hadn't just defended his land, he had exposed the rot, challenged the bullies, and shown others that you don't have to stay silent to stay safe. What was once a tense, HOA-dominated neighborhood has slowly begun to heal and transform. Conversations are warmer, rules are clearer, respect has returned. It's not just about fences, it's about drawing the line where decency ends and self-respect begins. And as the narrator leans back in his chair, surrounded by the sounds of home, he knows one thing with absolute certainty. He didn't just win a battle, he changed the landscape literally and figuratively. And for the first time in a long time, everything feels exactly how it should. Peaceful, private, and his